All right, Dark Fringe Radio listeners, I have a special guest on the line with me here tonight by the name of John Davis. And John Davis is a flattist for over the past 10 years. And John has been interviewed by several news sources, including the BBC, Pace Magazine. And his interviews have been featured on Bad Astronomer, Fox News, radio, and print. He's a software engineer, a computer scientist, and enjoys epistemology and mathematics. And if you could, please welcome to Dark Fringe Radio, Secretary of the Flat Earth Society, Mr. John Davis. John, how are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. Just glad to be here.
Thanks so much, John, for joining here on the podcast. And listen, we're going to talk about probably one of the most polarizing subjects of our time, the flat Earth theory.
Oh, definitely. And it certainly seems to have caught people's attention lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would attribute this probably closest to maybe in the last 10 years, the JFK assassination, when people started getting into it. But this is actually, I think, has eclipsed that in a lot of different ways. And I'm sorry to use that pun, but, it has overshadowed that in a lot of ways. But I kind of wanted to jump into this, head first. And I kind of gave you a little bit of your background. Could you give me maybe a little bit more, maybe if I missed anything?
Sure. I've been doing the whole flat Earth game, believing in the flat Earth for over a decade, probably closer to 15 years now, if not a bit more. I do a lot of work both on the theory side, working on some of the mathematics, as well as running the society, a lot of their day-to-day things like membership, which we're about to reopen, and we recently awarded to BOB, and as well as maintaining our web properties, our branding, and our library, where we try to collect as much flat Earth literature that's out there and make it available for everyone to read.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the most unsung, I would say, duties as a secretary of any kind of society is, collecting all that data, compiling it, and archiving it, and making sure that it's available. So, I definitely applaud you on that. Let me ask you this, John. We've been told throughout time and our educational system that the Earth is round, of course. And from studying globes as far as I could remember when I was a kid and studying basic astronomy, that the planets are told to us in our solar system that they're round. Could you tell me why we would be taught one thing and it not be the truth as the basic concept of the shape of the planets?
Sure. And there's a few reasons for that. And it kind of depends on how deep you want to go down the conspiracy hole. Right off the bat, we could just be wrong. We could be looking at the facts in a certain way that once you're told something, it's far easier to believe it and to rationalize that belief, especially when it's an almost universal belief. You can turn on any movie and you'll probably see a globe at the start or somewhere in the movie, let alone every classroom and just about everything you think of. Getting a little bit more onto the conspiracy side of things, I hear a good 3 or 4 reasons why we might be people would lie about it or might hide the truth, or whether intentionally or unintentionally. The one that's gaining popularity again, and one that was popular a little earlier in our history, was that there's a religious a motivation here, that people are trying to undermine God, since the Bible clearly hints at a flat Earth, if not outright states it. Other than that, you can go down a sort of Orwellian stance, and he even mentions this in 1984, where he says, is it beyond us to, create an alternate astronomy, and goes on to talk a little bit about the flat Earth. But the idea there would be that, control of information and control of information has its own sort of power, in and of itself. You can keep going there, to other things like, they're siphoning off the budget of space agencies, making this technology, which are the pet projects, and then selling to the private sector, kind of swindling the U.S. public, or whatever government's public it happens to be. You can also look at there's also several, Cold War narratives and whatnot where, or space race narratives where we, faked going to the moon, and then shortly after we realized that the Earth was flat, and that's why we're having so much trouble getting up there. And so we were kind of caught in this lie. Otherwise, we would lose the legitimacy of our government. Especially at that time.
Yeah, I can follow that. I mean, I could see that, and I can understand that because I'm under the belief personally that we never actually went to the moon. I mean, that's just my personal belief, and I believe that a lot of that stuff was faked. What we saw on the news and the media at that time. But that actually brings me to another question because we have a lot of these people now that have brought up the subject. Like I said, it's so polarizing. Everybody's talking about it. It's probably one of the most hot button topics as far as conspiracy theories is involved in our time. But one question comes to mind is that recently Neil deGrasse Tyson, he tweeted a picture of what a lunar eclipse would look like under a flat Earth theory. And of course, it's nothing like what we're used to seeing, currently. Can you elaborate on that photo, or maybe give me a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just like to state how funny I find it that folks like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye and so on find the need to go attack us if our view is so supposedly ridiculous. Why are they even giving us the day of time? It kind of reminds me a bit of what happened to Alfred Russel Wallace further back in our history. And there's a few times both Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson have made points against us that have either been patently wrong, given our beliefs, or just wrong given their beliefs. This is a good example. Obviously, we have a lot of different theories about lunar eclipses. I think one of the oldest ones, and just showing that, this answer has been something that this question has been something we've answered for, it's been over 100 years now, at least. It was in the 1800s when the book was written, by a Dr. Samuel Botham, who sort of founded our group back then, or at least the point of view. And his explanation is that there's another object, or a shadow object, that's getting in between the Earth and the moon. Since then, there's been a lot of other work and a lot of other explanations, especially those that rely on the fact that we believe that the moon is self-luminous. And that's most often supported by biblical evidence there. But on the other hand, there's a lot of evidence brought forth of specific instances of seeing like light through a lunar eclipse, or daytime lunar eclipses as well, that make any other, the globular explanation a bit hard to swallow.
Yeah, that's interesting because I did see something of that effect as far as the what you're speaking of in regards to the moon being self-luminous. And there was one theory that I did see about how the moon actually will reduce the degree of temperature, in some places here on Earth, because of the eclipse, or what it's going, or it, the moon itself illuminating on a certain area. Whether the degree of temperature may go down or up, there would be a fluctuation of some sort. Is that what you're talking about right there?
I know, but that's something that also comes up, especially in a lot of the older literature, and I think it's something that a lot of modern day flatists don't pay a lot of mind to. But when you get back into some of the older stuff, and there's probably a few other people today that also believe it, but there's talk about how the moon's rays are cooling and how they do differ from the sun's rays. And there's just a plethora of evidence for that just throughout history, aside from whether the fact of the matter is that the Earth is round or whether it's flat. A lot of people you'll talk to, especially in the medical profession and at hospitals, will say that the full moon tends to bring out crazies, and that the moonlight also, you'll see just from experts all the way back from antiquity up into the early 1800s, you'll see them saying that the moonlight causes rotting effects. You'll see the same sort of thing in a lot of bugs and animals and prey. A lot of predators will come out a lot more at night and be more enraged, and a lot of animals and such will also, you'll see studies that show increased vet visits. Now, to be fair, I do have to say I do have a responsibility to say that there are studies that say both ways on that. But just the breadth of that evidence, all the way back, to folks like Herodotus or some of the other Greek philosophers, all the way through all of educated history until just recently. It's hard to throw all the arguments out.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's where the whole word lunacy comes from, right? I mean, it comes from the word, luna, which is the moon, through Latin. So, lunacy is where, obviously where people go crazy, and through the full moon is where, you usually see that type of behavior. And I could see that, my mother, for instance, just to give you an example, she worked at a hospital for almost 20 years, and she would obviously see the repetitive, maybe, nature of how the full moon would affect certain people. She would always tell that to me. She would always explain, hey, listen, this tonight's going to be crazy because it's a full moon, and, people are going to be off the handle tonight. And so, I could definitely see that. Another point of contention is the ship in the horizon theory. That's one of the most popular things, where it's said that if a ship sails away in the horizon under a flat Earth theory, we would be able to see that ship no matter how far it goes. And if that case is true, why wouldn't I be able to see, say, for instance, I'm in Florida, right? For instance, why wouldn't I be able to see Cuba? Is it just because of the technology of the camera, or of whatever I'm looking through, or is it because of maybe the curvature of the Earth, or what is it?
And again, as a group of free thinkers, we have a lot of different beliefs over the our long history concerning this. As far as to the main question, why can't I see, say, London or anywhere on the world from here? When light passes through the particles in air, it actually scatters the light and makes it less. It makes it harder to see. This is sort of why we have that's sort of why the sky's blue in the instance of Rayleigh scattering, which is a little bit slightly different on the flat Earth, but still the principle exists, that just light does not travel indefinitely. If you ever have spent a good amount of time at the shore, far more often, and almost universally more often, what I'll see happen is when ships move away from us, or go into the distance, they actually fade out. Now, I'm not saying that there's never a case where you might see the mass first. Of course that does happen, and there are explanations for that, and they range from the older literature will talk about perspective effect, where, let's say, you're looking at you're looking at a very long street, let's say an indefinitely long street, and it has a bunch of street lamps on it. And as you look at it to the distance, you're going to notice that the base of the street lamp starts to disappear and sort of blend in with the base of the ground, just by the nature that it's closer to the center of your line of sight, and so it's going to shrink a little quicker than the rest of it. There's a lot of other things that come to play too. For example, the waves that are closer to you are going to appear proportionally larger than faraway objects. So as you get further away, the closer waves are going to make it appear as if the base of whatever, a boat, for example, in this example, a boat, would be obscured more, even though the wave size is obviously the same, no matter how close you are.
That sounds realistic. Well, let me say this. I've talked about a few points of reference that where non-believers of the flat Earth theory bring up. Can you give me maybe 2, maybe 3 points of reference or evidence that you can mention that may point to the hypothesis of a flat Earth? Can you give me anything? Sure.
There's a lot. First off, I'd like to say, well, the most common you're ever going to hear, and you're going to hear it from everybody, it's sort of or almost a hat trick at this point, where someone will say, show me the curve, and there's no experience that we we have as humans, really, except for maybe a few minor that couple of people out of all of us have ever seen, where you can actually see any curvature. And when you actually examine those instances, it's almost impossible to verify that that curvature was not caused by the placement of your eyes on the horizon, causing barrel distortion, an insufficient field of view, that sort of thing. There's a fellow, and he's actually a rounder scientist, an expert in optics, called Lynch, and he wrote a paper about the heights and whatnot that you would theoretically, if the Earth was round, of course, be able to see this curvature. And as it turns out, it's actually far above commercial airlines. And then at those heights, and we've talked to a few military people to confirm this, you have to, you're going to be in equipment and airplanes that have not an appropriate field of view to be able to actually see it. So it's the first one is really where's this curvature, and it's funny to me that people come up to me daily and say, well, I can see curvature at the beach, or I can see it at when I went on an airplane to London or whatnot, and this is just patently false, even if the Earth was round. So a lot of people, I think it's hard to give a lot of good evidence because people literally are seeing what they want to see. And what they've been taught to see, just the way the mind works and how we process visual images, let alone issues with the eye itself and the tools we use to telescopes and whatnot, which will all cause barrel distortion if you're not very exact to an almost ridiculous level in its use. Another one you'll hear just. Again, I put it in the hat trick category, is that water is always level. And over the years, we've done a lot of experiments with this, and so have other groups, including some of the early hollow earthers, oddly enough. But when you pour water into a glass, or if you try to pour it over a ball, or anytime you ever see water, it's always level. There's no curvature to it at all. Mm-hmm. There's no way there can be. That's just against the whole nature of water. With the exception of perhaps a test tube might have a little dip of it, and the water in the middle due to the surface tension. Right. Obviously, we're not talking about that when we're talking about lakes and bodies of water.
Right.
And then and then get back to our library. We just have a lot of the older flat earthers, again back in the 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s, would compile just books and books and books and books. I think there's about 4 or 5 books out there now that are called literally 100 proofs that the Earth isn't a globe, or 100 proofs this and that, 100 proofs zetetic for zetetic astronomy, and the breadth and the arguments is just ridiculous. For example, a lot of times you'll hear a globulist or a round earther say that snipers have to account for the curvature of the Earth when they're shooting a bullet. And let me rephrase that: the rotation of the Earth when you shoot a bullet, and take into account the Coriolis effect. And this is just about as ridiculous as believing that toilets flush opposite in Australia. Even if such a force did exist, it's so small that it's silly. And so the fact that we don't see the Coriolis effect, and when we look at things like Foucault pendulums, they produce very inconsistent results, so much so that most museums will place magnets below. And this is not just me being crazy or something. This is, you can look this up. Mm-hmm. This is what they do. They place magnets to guide it to show that a Foucault pendulum actually works, when in reality it's very imprecise and
it's being manipulated it's being manipulated by magnetic forces, obviously.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's so much evidence. I don't want to keep going. We have so much evidence in front of us that we can be a little dainty in our selection, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I understand. Listen, you touched on something about the astronomy, aspect of this, and back in 1610, Galileo Galilei, he observed the moons and of Jupiter rotating around it. He described them as small planets orbiting a larger planet, and the description was very difficult for even the church at that time to accept and follow it as a geocentric model where everything was supposed to revolve around the Earth. Now, this observation was also showed that the planets like Jupiter, Neptune, and later Venus that was also observed are all spherical, in an orbit around the sun. Now, we talked about how the flat Earth is not a new theory. This is something that's been going on for hundreds of years. Because a long time ago, we're talking about 300, 400, 500 years ago, a lot of people thought that the Earth was flat. So this is not something that's new. Why do you think this model now, or why do you think that model was so accepted, and then now just kind of forgotten about the flat Earth now in our time?
Well, it's actually odd because, there's a few points here that I'd like to touch on, starting from the beginning. With Galileo, it's actually interesting because if you look at some of the writings of folks like Paul Feyerabend, who wrote Against Method, he talks about how Galileo, the reason why his work wasn't accepted was not just because, the church happened to disagree with it. As point of fact, far earlier, they as you mentioned, changed their mind on the flat Earth when given evidence. When you look at the work of Galileo, and even Einstein, it kind of quipped at this when he said that the work is aimed far more, I'm paraphrasing, far more at comprehension than accuracy. There's just wild things in there that it would be impossible for the council that came together, which both had scientific experts as well as religious experts, and then also experts of the time that argued against Galileo, like Kepler. I believe that's right, Kepler. So just simply saying that it's hard for me. The reason it was hard to swallow Galileo, I think, at first was not necessarily some war between religion and reason, but instead because there was patent, mistruths in there that even uneducated men of the time would know. For example, the Copernican model at the time miscalculated the amount of tides in a day. Something that any sailor would know right off the base.
Of course, yeah.
As far as it, and I forgot the middle point I was going to make, so I'm going to jump right back to why is it so popular now? I'd like to say it's because it's true. And eventually people figured out. Now it is true that 300 400 years ago, people actually there's actually a myth that people in the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or however you want to call it believe that the Earth was flat, and a lot of historians have come out recently, unrelated to our movement, and have said that this is actually not true. It's sort of creating this sort of fake war between religion and reason and science. When in actuality, when you look at history, you see that most often religion is on the same side of science, not only in our culture and in Western culture, but in Eastern culture too. For example, the reason why it's so popular, you could boil it down to, we've got some celebrity endorsements. We've gotten ourselves out there a lot more. I know I've been fighting at the front lines for quite a while on the idea, but I think it's because it's true.
Yeah, listen, it holds a lot of water, and the only reason why it would hold a lot of water, and I do believe right now, we're in a time of awakening. We are seeing a lot of things for what they really truly are. I think that more than ever, and I think it's kind of more of a repetitive thing. I think these things come in waves. I think we kind of had an age of awakening in the 70s. Things kind of died down in the 80s and really went to non-existent or silent in the 90s and the 2000s. So I think now that we're starting to get into our age now, we're starting to see a little bit more of an awakening, and people are starting to open their eyes up to alternative views and theories when it comes to our Earth and where we came from and where we are exactly as human beings. So another point of contention that I want to kind of another point of contention I wanted to
bring with that.
Go ahead.
And I just to add a little bit, sorry to interrupt. I think it also has to do with us not only the advance of like relativism and as a scientific method, and even against method, like I mentioned earlier, but I think people are realizing that science isn't. We're not using science properly when we're treating it as a dogma. It's almost like we want to shoot science in the foot when we do that kind of action. And so I think people are getting a little fed up with science encroaching onto the social landscape and saying stuff like, well, and whichever way you believe on it, I don't think science should be making decisions such as, should people be able to have abortions or different emotional and actual social issues, not scientific issues, down that line.
Yeah, and you're right, because I mean, how many times do we read the headlines today and we see that, NASA or whomever says that, there's another planet that's similar to the Earth, that's maybe, 3 or 4 moons away from us. And, why are we just starting to see these things now? Why didn't we see these things 20 years ago? Why is this, are these things coming up now? Why is Pluto all of a sudden not a planet? Why did that get downgraded? All these questions come up, and you really kind of, the question comes up to me as just a normal guy, a layman. I'm not a scientist by no means, John. But what I'm saying is that a normal guy that I can say that, people tell me this information, the people that are supposed to know, quote unquote, what the truth is, it gets changed from day to day. It's never the same. It's like, okay, oh, I'm sorry, we're wrong. There's something else out there. So it never seems to me like they really, really, really know what the truth is.
Mm-hmm. There's actually a flat earther. I think he was one of the more recent ones, actually. Not as recent as our popularity with YouTube and some celebrities recently, but and he said any baseball player could be a the best baseball player in the world if only his hits were recorded and none of his misses. And I think it is frustrating to people to be constantly told different things when these are we're paying a lot of money, and our whole society is structured around trying to give the people that should have the ability to suss out the truth the means to do so. And when a lot of us normal people just don't have those abilities, and so we put a lot of trust into them, and when that trust is betrayed over and over and over again, and I realize that that's somewhat the nature of discovery, but on the other hand, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's either has to do with funding or political means or just greed and bad research or lust for academic fame and whatnot. So I could see why people might get a little mad and might start opening their mind a bit and stop saying, well, let's stop listening to the monks that are handing us down this dogma and start thinking a little bit more for ourselves.
Yeah, and one point of example is, I have a son who's 10 years old, and he's in the public school system, and to this day, John, they still teach that Columbus discovered America. That's exactly what's written. And my son comes home and he's like, Dad, we got to do this thing about Christopher Columbus discovering America. And I'm like, wait a second, wait. What are they teaching you again? I mean, because yes, I was taught that too as a child, but as I got older and doing my own research and doing my own investigation, which I tell everybody to do. I tell everybody, no matter how old you are, young or old, do your own research before you make a decision on anything. But I've learned through time that that's not the case. But they're still teaching our children this. They're still teaching. They're programming our children to believe this thing that's not true. So I can see what you're talking about. I understand completely.
It's surprising. Like, I don't know. One of these days I should write a book with just all the ridiculous stuff you can find in textbooks, because it really is laugh worthy sometimes. And people do. We trust these scientists and the organizations that decide what goes in textbooks and whatnot. And we put a lot of our work and the blood, sweat, and tears of our society into it, and it's just it's disappointing.
Very disappointing. Very disappointing. Let me ask you this, John. A lot of people bring up the fact of time zones as a proof that the world is round. It's one of those things that as a point of contention. Is time zones maybe a thing that can be explained in both the flat Earth and also the round theory?
Oh, definitely. And I think when you start researching and going down the line and reading it, I think that's true of a lot of things, or if not all of them. Aside for the things that we can explain that the round Earth can't. But again, one of the first attempt to do that, and was again with Samuel Robotham, and he came up with the flat Earth map that sort of looks like the UN logo, or the logo that the UN I believe later adopted. Which has its own little bucket there of interesting stuff. Yeah. But if you've never seen it, it's you have the North Pole in the center, and on the outside you have a ring of the Antarctic, and then the sun would be traveling roughly around the equator, depending on time of year and whatnot, lighting a particular portion of the Earth any time of the day. Of course, if you keep doing the research down the flat Earth. Down flat Earth theories and whatnot, you'll find a lot more explanations. But a lot of these, and I think it might have been. No, I don't want to say that because I don't remember off the top of my head. I was going to say I think Isaac Asimov actually made that argument in Flat Earth Quasars, but I don't. That's not sitting comfortable for me. But no, it's definitely something. And it again goes. People say, "Well, why isn't it lighting the whole Earth at the same time?" And I gave that answer a little bit earlier when I answered the question about why we can't see London, because light scatters and it doesn't travel indefinitely through a medium.
Yeah, it dissipates over distance and time. So yeah, I could see that. Another belief from most flat Earth believers, is that there is no such things as satellites orbiting the Earth, allowing us, obviously to have the capabilities of satellite television, cell phone service, and, of course, one of the most infamous things, the International Space Station. If there's no satellites, how are those things capable? Can you give me any kind of insight to that?
Sure. It's actually something I started researching a couple of years ago, but I'm sure the sources are still in this particular database. As well as the other ones I looked at. But if you travel to the IEEE, which is an engineering organization, but if you go to their IEEE academic database they host, which is called the Explorer database, and do a search for pseudolights, you'll see just hundreds of results about fake ways to fake pseudolights or satellites, ways we can increase satellites coverage by making man-made flown objects. And it shouldn't be any surprise if we can do this. If you look at spy planes or other unmanned aircraft, it's, pretty much a no-brainer.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, and I kind of already know the answer to this, but I kind of wanted to ask you anyway, just for some of the listeners that, may not know the answer to this, but, NASA has released hundreds and hundreds of photos of the, outer space demonstrating, the planets, the moon, the sun, they're all in a round shape, of course. Why is that not the end all to be all in the evidence that the Earth and planets are being, they're round? Why is that?
Well, I think first off, it would be if we could trust these people to tell us, if we could trust the scientists to actually tell us, what we're paying them for. Yeah, that'd be great. When you actually look at the images, though, and I'm sure you know this, just having looked at some of the moon landing stuff and come to your own conclusions there.
Yeah.
But some of it's just completely bonkers. You have to, your brain would have to be falling out of your head to believe some of these photos. And right now, you can even go to NASA's website. And I think when you say, some of these pictures that prove the Earth is round, everyone immediately thinks of the blue marble picture where it looks like a little blue marble in space, and it, has a bunch of clouds. And there's two interesting things about that picture. One, if you look closely enough, you can actually find somewhere in the clouds where sex is spelled out, plain as day. And then tying into that, if you go to NASA's website right now, probably, I doubt they've taken it down. It's been up there for forever. There's a fellow there that works there that's called Mr. Blue Marble. And if you do a search for Mr. Blue Marble NASA, it's going to come up right away. And he talks about, he has a little spot on him where he explains what he does. And he talks about how he takes, just thousands of satellite pictures that are, flat pictures, and he stitches them together to create pictures, create the image that we expect to see of a round Earth. So it's very hard to trust them. And then you also have stuff like losing them, the moon landing footage. Uh, I don't know, going across the country, diapers, repeatedly being caught for cocaine on their premises, not being able to explain like millions of dollars of their budgets one year, and just nothing ever comes of it. It's we like to because of instances like this, and this is an extreme example, but the flat Earth idea was originally founded on this idea known as Zeticism, and literally it means to seek through inquiry. And I think more realistic it means do your own research, do your own tests, and come to your own conclusion given your own evidence. This doesn't mean ignore all the evidence in the world other people make, but firsthand evidence should be primary. And NASA's giving us just reason after reason to ignore what they say because they aren't being honest about it. And then again, they're doing other duplicitous stuff, such as inventing technologies, and again, selling them to the private sector. And so if you happen to be a citizen who wants to make use of this technology that your tax dollars paid for, you actually have to end up paying for it twice, once through your taxes and then once to the private corporation who owns it now. So it's just really hard to take anything they say seriously. Especially, I'm sure you know quite a few of them, but there's just been goof ups and goof ups all over the years that it's ridiculous.
Yeah, John, I've seen it all. Listen, when it comes to NASA, I'm not really, giving them much clout. It goes back to when they, even stealing patents, from normal people, going to, people that were able to power cars with just water and stealing that patent and burying it under, loads and loads of, red tape and paperwork. So yeah, I totally see that. Another theory is, one of the most recent, maybe examples of why the Earth may be flat is I go back to Operation Paperclip and Admiral Byrd and that whole operation and what they witnessed. Could you maybe elaborate? I know personally, I've done the research, so I know where this kind of ties in to the flat Earth theory. But could you maybe give my listeners maybe a thread as how that whole Operation Paperclip ties into the flat Earth theory?
Sure, and that's definitely an area that I'm less versed in compared to some of the newer flat earthers. You didn't actually really hear it come about until recently in the flat Earth circle, which I find interesting. But if memory serves, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be thinking of something else. But Admiral Byrd spent quite a lot of time exploring Antarctica, and eventually he had a couple failures there, and he ended up coming back one final time. And when he did, he has just the most interesting account of it, and that he said that he eventually came to a plane where it was completely flat and everything was it was just an unbounded area of resources that were just so amazing that it just doesn't really make sense given that Antarctica, well, it is true that everyone is fighting over Antarctica for resources, and there's a UN treaty to that effect. Perhaps that gives us that theory of Byrd's, or that story of Byrd's, and that theory in general, a little more clout.
Yeah, I think that's the Trans-Pacific Pact or something like that. That they or something like that to that effect. That actually was probably, I think, was just shot down by Trump as in our administration just as recent. They kind of eradicated that. Where all the countries in our world basically came to an agreement that we would not go to that area, and I find that quite interesting. Why out of all the things in this world, why wouldn't you want to go to a certain part of the world to maybe share those resources? I know maybe there's a little bit of kind of fight to who gets there first kind of thing, but again, it kind of points to the whole fact of there's something more to than what we actually know.
Yeah, and some of it you can sort of explain a bit way with well, these companies, if you let people come here freely, they're just gonna pillage and rape the landscape and take all the oil and leave a mess for from then on. But like it's not very satisfying explanation when you actually go through what the agreement was about and some of the provisions. That just doesn't make sense. without having an explanation like, well, what's really beyond the Antarctic? What's really out there? And I think the governments of the world are scared for us to know. In the same way, they're scared for us to know that the Earth isn't round. It delegitimizes them. If you can imagine how mad or upset or questioning people are right now, simply because our textbooks are wrong and we're being told different things every day. What if all of a sudden we found out we were wrong about everything? Like the most basic fact that we use as or even the president of the United States has used as a joke. They said, oh, these flat earthers or whatnot don't believe in climate change and stuff like that. It really undermines their ability to do anything or to rule. Or to even keep a peaceful state, or rule in a beneficial way. So yeah, it's scary to think about the Antarctic.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like they're just trying to put as much interference as possible just to distract everybody. Yeah, I mean, that's the estimation that I get when I start to see a lot of static in one area. I look at it as, okay, where's the static coming from? Is it coming from the government? Is it coming from people? And when I see the majority of it coming from the government, I automatically question. It's like, okay, why are they doing that? Obviously, are they trying to hide something? What is the case, in this particular instance? Now, John, could you, in maybe in finality, could you give me one, big pinnacle estimation as to the proof of the flat Earth theory? Anything at all?
Well, honestly, it's that I really do feel that all evidence points that way. If you look at any particular point of contention, and we're not alone in this. If you look back in history, some other groups have come to the flat Earth themselves, like some Taoist scientists actually constructed the exact same model we did. Using Aristophanes' experiment of all things, which is usually used to prove us wrong. And it says, and they came up with the conclusion that the Earth was flat too. So then when you look at things like Aristophanes, you have to realize that that particular experiment and most other ones are based off the idea that the Earth is round. They're not proving it. They're assuming it so that they can calculate the circumference, or they can calculate some other thing based off that. There's no scientists in this world today that will walk into any job. I'm actually pretty hesitant myself to say my beliefs in my work, and still expect to have a job the next, and without being able to trust the authority on knowledge, that we have in our culture. I'm going to side with every single piece of evidence I've ever seen. That everything says it's flat. Water, is level. It always is. I mean, unless you're pouring a pitcher or something. But of course, we're not talking about that. I'd love to hear a reason why it's round, to be honest.
That's great stuff, John. I think you've brought a lot of great points to this particular theory. I really hang my hat, to the fact that scientists themselves, like yourself, have subscribed to this theory. We're not talking about some crazy conspiracy theorists like myself, in the middle of nowhere. No, these are scientists that are actually saying this, and with actual empirical evidence. And that's what actually really, really, turns my head to this whole subject, because I think that's the most fascinating part about this, is that you actually are getting people of your caliber that are actually subscribing to this theory, and saying that this is something that should be actually looked at. And I applaud you, John. And could you give me some more information about the Flat Earth Society?
Oh, definitely. I guess the best place to check us out, learn a little bit more about us, would be the flatearthsociety.org. You can find our library there, which just has hosts and hosts of literature on the subject, as well as our online forums. We can come in and talk with real flat earthers, or a lot of angry round earthers that come to.
There's a lot of angry ones out there, John.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It always keeps us on our toes. And just come check us out. That'd probably be the best way to learn more about us.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I want to kind of point out too. There's a lot of people obviously that don't believe in this, and that's fine. But it just seems to me that there's such a high degree of hostility when it comes to something like this, and it kind of boggles my mind. It's just because, like, yeah, obviously it may be, completely opposite to what you've been indoctrinized as far as what you believe in, but why would you be so angry towards other people that have opposing views?
I can't tell you how many times. One of the things I do that I failed to mention as secretary is I answer. I do my best. In the age of the internet, it's a little hard, but I try to answer every correspondence that comes through my desk, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whatnot. And you wouldn't believe how many times I get told to jump off the edge of the earth or to kill myself. But then now and then I'll be able to calm them down a little bit and talk about the matter a little more rationally. And what I find out is most of these are the people that don't know why they believe it's round, and they'll give explanations, and I'll be like, well, that's on Snopes.com or as an example, as being false, totally so flush backwards. And so I think it scares them that they might be wrong, and that everything they've been told might be wrong, and it should scare them. It should scare all of us.
Yeah, the unknown is the most the scariest thing in the world. So I always truly believe that. And when people have a hard time wrapping their minds around a theory, I think that the first thing that jumps into their mind is fear. The next thing after that is fighting against that and being nasty as possible. So I totally feel for you, my friend John. And I don't know how you deal with that with the backlash when it comes to this. So I definitely give you props when it comes to that. John, could you give me any more information regarding the flat Earth and where more people can find any of that information or your information?
Yeah, well, again, our site's a great place. There's a lot of good literature out there. A lot of it we make available, but you can check it out on Amazon. We actually have gotten quite a few people reprinting the books nowadays. If you happen to be in Knoxville, we have some offices that you can come and visit. At least for the time being, we're thinking about moving them as we used to be located in London, and well, that's another long story. But no, mostly the flatearthsociety.org would be the best place to come. We have other places. You can also check us out at Flat Earth Today on Facebook, as well as Flat Earth Today on Twitter. I always forget some of the social networks.
No. Listen, I'm as guilty as you when it comes to that. So thank you for giving me that information. So, John, thank you so much again for coming here on Dark Fringe Radio. I do appreciate it, and we definitely will have you back on here again in the future. And if there's anything that I can do on my end to promote anything regarding the flat Earth theory, please let me know. Okay?
Definitely, I will do that.
All right, wonderful. Listen, again, Will Martinez here with Dark Fringe Radio. I want to thank my guest, John Davis, with the Flat Earth Society. If you have any questions, look at the Flat Earth Society and, look into their website, look into the information. Do your research. That's what I tell everybody. Everybody that looks into the Flat Earth, everybody asks me, hey, what do you think about the Flat Earth? Do you think the Earth is flat? Do you think it's round? What I tell them is this. Do your research. Don't ask me. Do your research.
Best advice.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I don't want to sway anybody one way or the other. I say, listen, do your research and come up with your own estimation from that point on. So again, John, thank you so much, and I do appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me on.